Welcome to our Open Science Skills training. My name is Cameron Riddell, and I will serve as our guide for the day. My background is in psychology. I was in graduate school studying cognitive science, specifically human memory. And so I'll bring up a number of anecdotes from my time in graduate school and my experiences there. Of course, though, open science is not just for psychology or social scientists, it is for scientists of all backgrounds. So this is, again, a point where I'm going to be relying on you. If you have an experience with some of the concepts as they come up within your specific field, we want to hear about how that applies to you. So let's go ahead and get started. In order to start, I have a couple of slides that I want to share with you all. And so to do that, I'll start by sharing my screen. So behind me, you'll see my screen. I'll hide in the corner over here, and I will even go ahead and double share my screen with you all so you can see the text as clearly as possible. This is Open Science Skills. We have a number of topics to get through between today and tomorrow. We're going to cover 5 different topics, starting with the purpose of open science, transitioning into reproducible work, discussing how we can communicate data, and then finally wrapping up with how we can use and access open data and what it means to make our results open and use results that are open as well. And so we're going to start right at the beginning here with the purpose of open science. And one of the biggest drivers is going to be the reproducibility crisis. We are transitioning or moving away from the idea that science is not reproducible. And I love starting these trainings with this quote here, that there's an increasing concern from that most current published research findings are in fact false. The probability that a research claim is true may depend on study power and bias, so a little bit of statistics and also a little bits of study design, as well as the number of other studies on the same question. And so we get this idea here that science is going to be built on trust. And what I mean by that is if I tell you something, if I claim in an article that I have written that my hypothesis, we'll call it hypothesis X, if I claim that my hypothesis X is true, and you read through my paper, maybe you're not very familiar with the work that's being done, you will have to trust that what I am saying is true and accurate. And this is how the science has been done for a very long time. There's always been a high degree of trust. However, this system of trust, it's not starting to break down, but we are starting to question, well, how much can I trust you? And so this has led to the observation that a lot of science that we have already done doesn't reproduce. And especially coming from a psychology background like myself, we have a plethora of studies done in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, probably still today. But I will say the field is getting more rigorous, more statistically rigorous, and the study designs are getting more rigorous as well. But psychology specifically has had a huge issue with not being reproducible. Now that I've said this term a couple of times, I want you all to warm up your keyboards or your mobile devices just a little bit. And in the chat, let me know what your field of study is and whether or not you believe your field is currently undergoing a reproducibility crisis. And if you're not certain what the reproducibility crisis is, I'll reiterate it one more time clearly. The reproducibility crisis is the idea that many findings that have already been established cannot be reproduced. Meaning, if I take a study and I have access to the data set that the study analyzed, and I have access to all of maybe the scripts or whatever software was used to analyze that data, if I have those two pieces, I should be able to come out to the same set of results that the original authors came to. And so that is what it means to be in a reproducibility crisis. And so in psychology, we have had many studies. Think back to the 90s. There was a study published. If you wash your hands, you tend to walk faster. And you're thinking, that can't be, is that true? I'm not even sure. So that is what we were asking. What is your field of study? And what do you think your field is currently undergoing a reproducibility crisis? Excellent. I see some responses coming in the chat. Keep those going. Excellent. Cancer biology and a lot of reproducibility crisis. Physical science. Excellent. A lot of researchers here. Great. So now that we've established what the reproducibility crisis is, it's hard to pinpoint the depth of the impact on any particular field. And so this remains kind of an idea. So from here, let's take this to a more specific point. In 2011, Science, not the concept, but the actual journal, Science began requiring authors to, quote, share data and software upon request. And what we know is that having access to both the data and the software used to analyze the data is essential in order for us to come to the same conclusions, or at least come to the same set of results that the original authors did. If I can at least do this, I give those authors a little bit more credibility. And I say, okay, well, maybe what you're saying here is actually true. And if we are unable to do this, it's very bad. So in 2011, the Science Journal began requiring authors to, quote, share data and software upon request. This is a great move forward. However, in 2018, we had researchers investigate 204 different reports for reproducibility. And what they found is that under half of the paper's authors actually shared their data and software, meaning that they reached out to the original authors and they said, hey, can we have access to your data and software? You said by publishing in Science, you agreed that you would share this information upon request. And under half of those authors actually shared their data and software. And then of those 50%, of the remaining 50% that actually did share their results, well, in the grand scheme of things, only 26% of those published results could actually be reproduced there. And so we end up with this pie chart here on the right-hand side that shows us that could we reproduce results from these 204 reports or articles? 74% of them could not be reproduced. Remember, half of those, 50%, was because the authors never emailed back, never wrote back with their data and software. And then the other 25% simply could not be reproduced from the materials that were provided. And so this is a little bit more of an inkling that, wow, this is not necessarily limited to one field. And there is a large question of, if science can't reproduce, then am I supposed to still believe it? And this breaks that level of trust that I started the class off talking about. By having work that does not reproduce, we start to question the things that we thought were established knowledge. And questioning things is always great for the forward advancement of science because that gives us building blocks to move forward from. But think of how much faster we could move as a field, we could move as a society, if we could simply trust the things to be true and if they reproduced the results every single time. Now, I'm going to talk about a couple of other points about what the purpose of open science is. We've established that the reproducibility crisis is indeed very, very important. And as my second point about what the purpose of open science is, it's to remind ourselves that research is not just about you. Scientific research is meant to be for the benefit of all. And in practice, one way that we can view how science interacts with society is via three core groups. We have our scientific researchers, our policymakers, and the general public. And in ideal worlds, and this isn't always how it works, of course, but researchers do science and obtain scientific results. Then these scientific results are influenced or are then shared with policymakers as well as the general public. The public helps fund and give input to the research that takes place, and the policymakers help to implement measures that are informed by the scientific results that improve the health, environment, and the livability of all of society. And so these three groups remain core. That's our researchers, our policymakers, and our general public. But you'll also notice up here that I have many other bubbles of groups that interact with research or groups that digest scientific results. So we'll have infrastructure providers, technicians, citizen scientists, data managers, educators, software engineers, science journalists, and more. These are all consumers of a product that you, a researcher, make. And so it's often easy to think, especially if you are new in graduate school and you're getting one of your first couple of publications across the table, it's easy to think, well, nobody is ever going to read this. It's never going to make an impact. So I'm just going to do the bare minimum here. But do know that even if you don't get that citation count up on Google Scholar or whichever other service you use, do know that people will come across your article even if they do not formally cite you. They will read it and they will make use of its information. And so let's always remind ourselves that research is not just about you, the researcher, but it is also about all of the other people and entities that interact with the research product that you are creating. And open science is here to strengthen the connection between all these groups. And the reason that open science is a constant reminder that research isn't just about us is that open science calls for a new level of transparency. At the very least, we should always be sharing our data and our code. And then on top of that, we should be transparent in our communications, in our writing style, in our approach. We should declare any biases that may appear before us or that we might have encountered along the way. We should share any changes that we have made in study design and say, well, we took this original path down path A, but at some point we had to transition to path B because maybe we couldn't recruit enough study participants, or maybe our cell cultures didn't reproduce the way we thought they would, and so we had to use a different media or something of that nature. And so open science is just being transparent about all of these things, because at the end of the day, if we operate under the current closed science paradigm, it is very, very tempting to take all of those minor mistakes, those minor errors, sweep them under the rug and just say, oh, well, I started off on path A and I ended up going with path B. And then when I write my publication, I never mention path A. I'll just say, I knew path B was going to be the correct path this whole time. And that is misleading. You are burying facts. You're not telling the story how it actually happened. And it's important for these individuals who are digesting our research output to be aware that things might have changed or that things didn't go exactly as planned. The third reason that open science is incredibly important is that we want to be able to support our own arguments. And this slide has no text on it. It's been intentionally left blank because I think this point really stands and speaks for itself. If you are having a debate or a discussion or an argument with somebody, well, you'll probably ask them to produce evidence. And if they are unable to produce evidence, well, at the end of the day, I'm probably not going to believe anything that they said. And so in the spirit of open science, if we're having a disagreement and I ask you to produce evidence and you say, well, it's all here in my PDF, it's all here in the article, I say, well, yes, those are the words that you wrote about the science that was done, but can I actually see the science that was done? Can I see the actual application of the method? Can I see the actual data set you collected? Can I see how you analyze that data set in a reproducible fashion? And if we are already operating under an open science paradigm, these materials have already been shared. I don't even need to ask you for your evidence. I can simply see it there. But if all you're doing is publishing a good-looking PDF, I'm left scratching my head wondering, is everything right? Did they actually do everything the exact same way that they presented themselves as doing? Or are there minor deviations that they're kind of just brushing over because at the end of the day, we want to look good academically? And so in the spirit of transparency, in the spirit of open science, we want to be able to support our own arguments. And the best way that we can do that is by providing all of the evidence that we have up front in a transparent fashion. The fourth reason that open science is worth doing is because we can give and receive credit for more of the work that we are already doing. In the current age, we probably are simply just publishing that article, that PDF that we write up at the very end. But by being transparent, you're actually also going to be inclined to publish those research artifacts like your proposals, like your data management plans, your tutorials if you made any analytical software pipelines, any code or notebooks that you've written, and you're all also incentivized to archive that work. By publishing each of these steps leading up to, of course, your paper, well, you're making more opportunities for other people to reuse the things that you have already created. And this is a huge point in open science. Not only are we being transparent by sharing our work and providing evidence like we just established, but we are also providing opportunities for other people to come in, cite our work, reuse that work, so that they can incorporate it into their own line of thinking, into their own line of questioning. And that is providing benefit for all. And of course, whenever somebody uses something that we have produced, we get that citation, and that citation count on Google Scholar goes up, which is a little bit like our unfortunate academic currency in today's age. Now, the next reason we do open science is called the file drawer problem. And I am very, very curious. In the chat, can you let me know if you have heard of the file drawer problem before? I know that many of us have probably not, and that is perfectly okay, but do let me know if you have heard of what the file drawer problem is. So the file drawer problem is effectively going to be a series of points. I'll present it to you in a series of premises, followed with a conclusion here. This is the file drawer problem. First, let's establish that most academic work is funded by public, we can even say private money in this case as well. So if you get your funding from a public or a private entity, well, we all know that when somebody gives us money to do things, it creates pressure on us to demonstrate value with that money that was provided. Two, there's merit in publishing novel studies in high impact journals. You want that Nature publication. You want that Neuro publication. You want that Cell publication. And this often prioritizes positive or novel findings. You will not find in the journal Nature a reproduction of an existing study. You won't find a published result there that says, we did the exact same things that a previous author did 5 years ago, and we came to the same results. That is simply not going to get published in Nature. And so in our current application of science, in our current closed science system, there is merit in publishing these novel studies, right? Something that nobody else has done before, because this increases the chances that we get our publication into high impact journals, and having publications in high impact journals is going to incentivize us to focus on publishable results. Because by having these publications here, our future funders, our future hirers are going to look more positively on us. And so academia is incredibly competitive, and this incentivizes us to focus on publishable results. By focusing on publishable results, we are always chasing these very novel studies, trying to publish in high impact journals, and we want to demonstrate value from the funding that we have received. Therefore, we end up with a world that looks like this. Are studies that don't work, because let's be honest, if you have done research, if you've done more than 3 studies, probably one of them did not work the way that you thought it did. Meaning you either got statistically non-significant results, or you had to completely scrap the idea because you realized partway through, maybe you didn't think it through fully, that you couldn't conduct the research in the way that you thought you could. And so studies that don't work are less likely to be published. And this may even reflect poorly on the authors. So if you say, oh, I thought hypothesis A was going to be true, at the end of the day, we found out that hypothesis A is not true, and you publish that, well, other people are going to say and read that and think, oh, you come up with ideas that don't work. Why would I provide funding for you in the future? Why would I hire you in the future? And the issue here is that line of thinking is completely backwards with how the world works. There is never, you will never find an individual who every study that they conduct works exactly the way that they thought it was going to. And if you do find an individual, I would highly, rigorously check out the work that they have done, because it's probably a little bit questionable, and they are probably going to be doing some shady things. So how does open science impact this file drawer problem? If this is how the world works now, and it's not great, what does the open science paradigm provide to us that fixes or alleviates this problem? So let's revisit some of these same premises, but we're going to revise them a little bit. Academic work being funded by public or private money, creating pressure to demonstrate value, well, that's going to be true either way. In an ideal society, though, I will say that the public money that is awarded to you should come as a no strings attached for results. It does come with the strings attached to actually do and conduct the study in the way that you said you would, pivoting where necessary and being transparent with those pivots. But if the study doesn't pan out, you should not feel bad that you have wasted public money. You should, in fact, feel good because, one, the money was already awarded to you based on the design and efficacies of your study, and two, you are not tied to the results. So that won't actually change here. But coming to point number two, when we say that there is merit in publishing novel studies in high-impact journals, which often prioritize positive or novel findings, well, there should also be merit in reproductions and replications, because although these aren't uncovering something we didn't know, it builds confidence in things that we thought we know. And what this means is if I go out and I find, make a hypothesis A again, I love hypothesis A, it's my favorite hypothesis. With hypothesis A, if I come to the conclusion that, oh, based on my study, my results here, hypothesis A, I believe is true, well, 5 years from now, somebody else comes along and says, this hypothesis A is pretty interesting. And I think Cameron tested it in a fairly odd or maybe a slightly interesting way. I'm going to redo the same study, changing one or two aspects about it. This is what we call a replication. And after all of that, oh, hypothesis A is still true. This only serves to build confidence that hypothesis A is true. If you only find one study published on something, it's not a huge body of evidence supporting that particular finding. But if you find 100 studies all aimed at targeting these same or similar hypotheses, well, this is a much larger body of evidence in favor for some specific finding. So there is merit in our reproductions and our replications, because although it doesn't provide us with new or novel findings, it does build confidence in what we think we know. And third, we established earlier that academia is incredibly competitive, and this incentivizes researchers to focus on publishable results. And in an open science paradigm, we should also recognize that science should be collaborative as it has a shared goal. It should not be individually competitive. All work that is thoughtfully carried through should be indexed as public knowledge. And what this means is that if you carry out a particular study and somebody else has already published on that, or maybe at the time of your authorship, somebody else had not yet published on that, well, at the very least, you should still publish whatever you're working on, provided that it was a thoughtfully carried through. And I will say most funded experiments are going to be thoughtfully carried through or thoughtfully planned out because you already passed that funding award stage. And so with our open science revision here, let's see how our conclusion changes. Originally, we said studies that don't work are less likely to be published and reflect poorly on the authors. Therefore, authors take that publication or take that PDF and they put it in a file drawer where nobody will ever see it. And in an open science world, studies that don't work are actually informative, and they can save repeated effort within a given field, thus saving both time and taxpayer money, especially if you're getting that funding from public awards. And so always remember that if you have conducted an experiment and it didn't go the way that you thought it would, that does not mean that you just throw away your paper. That doesn't mean you just throw away the idea and say, this was a bad idea or a dumb idea. Instead, that it still warranted some effort in trying to publish that, because you never know if another researcher somewhere across the world, somewhere in a different country, or even somebody down the hall in a different lab has a very similar idea as you. And they might come across the paper that you weren't happy with and say, oh, well, when you study hypothesis A in this particular context, it doesn't work out. But I wonder what would happen if you studied hypothesis A in a different context. And thus we are propagating the machine of science. We are inspiring other people to ask more detailed, more refined questions. Now, oh, there's a great comment in the chat. Before I address that comment in the chat, and I would love to hear others' thoughts on that comment, Let's talk about the retracted science and retraction index. This is a figure published by Fang and Casadevall in 2011, and from a paper titled "Retracted Science and the Retracted Index" or Retraction Index. And I'm not going to go into the depths and details of the analytical design here, but what I want to highlight is on the x-axis of this chart, we have something that the authors call the retraction index. It is a loose mapping of the likelihood or probability that any particular journal is going to take a publication back. And retractions happen for a number of reasons. Maybe the author was found out to be cheating or making up data on the extreme end, or maybe the authors themselves reanalyzed their study design, said, oh no, this actually doesn't work. I've already published this. And then they do the correct thing of reaching out to the journal, inform the journal of the mistake that has been made, and ask the journal to retract the publication. What's interesting is if you plot this on the x-axis and then on the y-axis, you have the impact factor of the journal. And if you're unfamiliar with what an impact factor is, you can almost think of it as like a metric of prestige. And typically you want to publish in the most prestigious journals because that's going to get you that academic credit that you want. And what you'll see here is that there is a loose positive linear correlation or relationship between the impact factor of the journal and what the authors coin as the retraction index here. And so you'll notice that the higher the impact factor, the more likely a given paper or article is going to be retracted. Now, this is simply an observation, right? It's not a causal experiment. There's no design or manipulation here. But what is interesting is that there are a number of different explanations you could have. On one end, that's very extreme. You could say, well, people who want to publish in these high impact journals are always trying these crazy or these outlandish study designs. And so it might not be a strong indicator, or it might not be a strong way of approaching science because they are, as Meta coins it, moving fast and breaking things, right? On the other hand, you could simply align this to that, well, researchers can make mistakes, and these publishers will often, the more prestigious publishers will probably have maybe more publications under their belt, or another reason. But you can see that there's a wide area of speculation as to why this relationship exists. But I think at the very interesting level, understanding that this relationship does exist brings into question, well, why are these high impact journals more likely to retract an article over their lower impact factor counterparts? So we have talked about 5 different points for the purpose of open science. We know that open science will help us fight against the reproducibility crisis. We know that research is not just about us, and open science serves as a constant reminder of that. We know that open science will help us support our own arguments, and it helps us build confidence in the work that other individuals have done or other groups have done. We also know that we should receive credit for the work that we're already doing. So if I'm creating notebooks or any other research artifact aside from that beautiful PDF at the end of the process, I can get citations for that. I can get credit for it. And then finally, we know that our work does not belong in the file drawer. Our work that's thoughtfully carried through and well planned out deserves to be published, deserves to be in the spotlight so that other people can make use of that work and continue building on top of it. Just because something doesn't work out the way that we thought it did does not mean that we cram it into the bottom of a drawer, never to see the light of day. So what this all implies is that open science does require a philosophical shift within academia, right? Earlier, you heard me alluding to the fact that, oh, well, if you don't have certain publications in certain high impact journals, you won't get hired. Or if you don't have a citation count above X, well, that means you're not as productive as another individual who has a higher citation count or more publications. And so we are often valuing the wrong things, and that's usually because there's not enough time to go through and read everyone's work in its entirety. And so we truly do need to shift our philosophical views here within academia to understand that doing a couple of these additional things, being more transparent in our communications and our publications is worth all of the effort. But it won't change overnight, and it won't change just because one person said it was important one time. All of us here need to be advocates for open science and tell our peers, tell our colleagues that this is an important thing to do. And once we tell our colleagues and peers that it's an important thing to do, our hope, right, is that the funding paradigms will also shift in our favor. And you'll start seeing more grants to say that, well, if you upload your software and data alongside the publication, you'll get additional funding for that time and effort that you have to curate your code repository and your data set for public consumption. And so we want to start generating views that then generate actual shifts in how things work, and especially providing some monetary incentive or some financial incentive in order for us to do science in a better way than we were doing it yesterday. Now, we have a couple of terms to discuss before we take our very first micro quiz. Earlier, you heard me use both of the terms, reproducible and replicable. These words are not interchangeable. They mean very distinct things. And this comes from the chapter of understanding reproducibility and replicability. Reproducible means that you are able to obtain consistent results using the same input data, computational steps, methods, and code, as well as conditions of analysis. Whereas replicable means that you are able to obtain consistent results across studies aimed at answering the same scientific question, each of which has obtained its own, often independent, data set. And so all reproducible means is that if I email you and ask you for your data and your analytical code, and you send me those things, I am able to come to the exact same set of results. I'm able to hopefully run your code very easily on the data set that you have provided, and then finally come to the outcome here. Replication means that instead of asking you for your data and software, maybe I read your paper on hypothesis A, and I say, oh, hypothesis A studied in this context is interesting. I wonder if hypothesis A still holds true within context B. And then I go and I conduct a study still aimed at proving or disproving or providing evidence in favor or evidence against hypothesis A, but I have changed the study design ever so slightly. I'm going to go then collect my own data set with this new paradigm, and then I'm going to analyze it probably in a very similar manner as the original study did. And if we come out supporting hypothesis A is true in both context A and context B, well, now we have more evidence in favor that hypothesis A is true, is correct, and we have on our hands a replicable finding. Now, I will say that for replications, this isn't just a good thing to do for other authors, especially in the field of psychology. Many individuals I know have started doing what we call self-replications. Due to the academic rigor of the field, many psychology studies will publish not just a single study, but you're going to publish on usually a chain of studies, 1, 2, maybe even 3 studies, all in a single publication. And what you end up doing with these studies is study 1 will test hypothesis A. Study 2 will then change that slightly to see if hypothesis A holds under some alternative conditions. And study 3 might even test hypothesis A again, or it might actually extend hypothesis A to see, well, can we do hypothesis A and something else? And what we're doing with each step of the way is we're trying to replicate our original findings of hypothesis A. Study 1 here is the original study. Study 2 was a replication with a slight change in how study A was being analyzed. And then study 3, we still had to prove that study A or hypothesis A was true, but then we also have to extend it. We have to build upon it. So in each of these each of these studies, we have to prove time and time again that hypothesis A is holding true and holding correct, and it's going to be collected from different data sets each time. These are what we call self-replications. There's also one very, very, very important acronym that we need to know for open science, and that is our FAIR acronym. FAIR is usually meant in terms of data. And we want our data to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. But I extend this a little bit further because I love this acronym so much. I think FAIR actually applies to almost every facet of science, especially if you're operating in an open manner. And what these terms mean is this. If I'm going to share a data set, or if I'm going to share a study, or if I'm going to share some software, whatever I share has to be findable. If I have a study and I say, this is the best study that mankind has ever seen, and then I just keep it on my desktop computer, I never put it on the internet, I never give it to a publisher, that study is never going to be findable. And if the study is never findable, nobody else will understand how cool this work that I have done is. So we know that we need to be able to put this study or this data set in front of other people. And how we do that is usually by going through a publisher or putting it online. Now, even if I just put it online, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is findable. I run a very incredibly popular blog. It gets about 4 visitors every single month. I know, small pat on the back. And so what I've done is I'll upload my study to my incredibly popular blog. Is this findable? Is anybody, aside from my 4 monthly visitors, ever going to read this thing? No. And this is why we typically go through publishers, because they have the resources to do marketing. And they also have the audience already of people who will be searching through things. And they are also indexed with search engines like Google or their own internal search engines as well. And so this is why we typically will go through a publisher. It's to make sure that our work is findable, that other people can come across it. Now, the next step to this is accessible. Just because you can find it doesn't mean you can access it. And I think everyone will be familiar with this idea if you have ever gone on Google Scholar or some other article search engine, found the most interesting paper, a very relevant article or paper for the work that you're doing, and you click on it, and it says, oh, you can read the abstract, but the rest of the paper is behind a paywall. Either get a very expensive license with the publisher, or alternatively, you can pay like 20 or 25 US dollars to read one PDF. And I will say, even in the most desperate of times, I don't know many people who will pay that 20 to $25 just for a single PDF. Sounds a little bit silly, sounds a little bit expensive. And so we want to make sure that the things that we make findable are also accessible, because how nice is it when you go to find a scientific article that there is no paywall? And you can read not just the abstract, but the full body of the work that has been presented or been carried out. And so that's what we mean by being accessible. Now, the I here means interoperable. This is the one letter of the acronym that gets fairly different interpretations depending on whether you're applying this to data or research method or study design or study methodology or software. But I will say, in terms of publication, so in terms of sharing findings, interoperability most nearly means that you are using all of the common established terms within the field. As part of my research, I used to do studies with fMRI, that is functional magnetic resonance imaging. It's a tool that lets you non-invasively study brain activity over time. You can kind of take a video recording of brain activity, and it has very fine spatial resolution, meaning I can differentiate brain activity on the outside of your brain versus from the inside of your brain. You can go even finer than that. You get activity within fairly small brain regions. But what happens if I then go to publish a study that I did using fMRI and I say, you know what? The term functional magnetic resonance imaging, that's so 2001. Instead, what I'm going to do, I'm going to change up the acronym. For what reason? Absolutely none. But instead of fMRI in my paper, I'm always going to reference it as XYZNF. And then you come across this paper that I've shared, it's findable, it's accessible, and you start reading it and you're like, what is XYZNF? What is this person talking about? That is what interoperability most means within the context of a publication. Of course, within context of a data set, well, interoperability means, can I even open up this data set using some common set of tools on my computer? And within software, it means, can I actually run this particular code on my computer? Then we get to the R, which is reusable. Is this work reusable? Does it have a license? Is it citable? These are two of the most common pitfalls to making things not reusable. If I never publish a license, and thankfully, if you go through the standard or typical publishing paradigm, it will have a license attributed to it so other people can reuse it. But if you forget to upload a license, maybe if you're doing an archive or a preprint or something of that nature, make sure that other people can reuse your work. And of course, outside of the publication realm, can other people reuse your data set? Can other people reuse your software? And so this is a huge part of open science, because one of the reasons that we are being so transparent with every step and everything that we do is so that other people can go ahead and reuse this particular work. I'm curious, I want to hear from you. We just talked about many of the important aspects of open science and a little bit of the work or effort that is included to perform or to carry out open science. Well, I'm curious, why isn't this the norm already? Why are we not already doing this? What are some of the barriers that you have seen or encountered by open science? And so I'll give you all just a minute here to enter some thoughts into the chat. And of course, I do have my own thoughts as well. So take some time, answer in a sentence or so in the chat. Doesn't have to be very long and thought out and detailed, but why are we not already doing science in an open or transparent fashion? I know for one, it's more work, right? I pointed out things that we are not doing yet. And so these are all additional things that we need to do on top of the things that we are already doing. And so trying to convince somebody that doing additional work that's not a core requirement, well, that's going to weigh a little bit unevenly on some people, and they might just not want to do it simply because it is more work. There's no monetary benefits. I absolutely agree. Nobody's really getting paid that much money to do science in this specific fashion. In fact, you're getting paid to come up with a study, to carry out that study, and then to publish that study. Publish or perish strategy, deadlines, and no institutional pressure to do it. Exactly. And that's why we want to change the philosophical views and accreditations that are being held. And the longevity of traditional mark of going science. Excellent. Giving up control and sometimes credits. And a lot of scientists worry about being like that. Definitely. There was one presented earlier, and that was a fear of getting scooped. Now, this wasn't necessarily about the context of why aren't we already doing this, but a lot of people think that, well, if I'm being so open and transparent, if I'm supposed to share things before I publish, what's stopping somebody from going and taking the things that I share and then just being able to publish on them faster? So if open science tells me to share a data set shortly after I collect it, but before I publish my paper, well, somebody else could take that data set, do the analysis that I was interested in, and then all of a sudden I have been scooped. Open science is time consuming. I agree, it is time consuming because there's so many things that you need to worry about. And I will say it's also a little bit scary, because when you are going to share more things, well, these are more places that other people can criticize you. If you share the specific data set that you analyze, somebody could look at that data set and be like, oh no, this is garbage. I don't know what you collected here. And if you share your code alongside as the part of the analysis, somebody could read through your code and say, oh, this code doesn't do what you think it's doing. This is terrible. And while this feedback might come off as negative, and it is a scary thing to open yourself up to feedback, this is why we spend so many iterations drafting and editing and updating our papers before we publish them. It's a lot of time needs to be put in if you're also preparing other materials to be shared publicly as well. And so what I will say to dissuade your fears is this. While we are opening ourselves up to critiques, you will find that the people who come online, who are looking through your code repositories or looking through the data sets that you have shared, are far more patient than your mind might think they are. We're changing this idea that academia is this cutthroat, critical area, and instead we want to be open, collaborative, and supportive. And so by publishing code, sure, I'm opening myself up to criticism. And maybe since I'm a researcher, I'm not very confident in the code that I write because it's just something I've picked up along the way. Well, in addition to being criticized, I'm actually also opening myself up for other people to contribute. And so they could say, hey, I noticed that on line, 80 of the script that you have written, there's something a little odd going on, but here's a contribution that I think should fix it. Do you want to incorporate this contribution? And then now all of a sudden we are working collaboratively. We are working towards a future where criticism is not just handed out, but support can also be given through that criticism as well. And so these are fantastic ideas of why we are not already doing this. Oh, not enough knowledge. This is a great one. And actually, I think this is the first time in class that I've heard somebody say this, because we know open science as a concept is a good thing, but it's very vague and I don't know all the specifics. If I'm sharing data, what licenses do I use? What licenses do I stay away from? Where do I actually put the data? Can it just go on my Google Drive or can it go somewhere else? And finally, reproducibility. What does it take for an experiment to be reproducible? Well, thankfully, those are all questions that we are going to address both today as well as tomorrow. So hopefully you all feel more confident for these particular questions here. But I absolutely agree. That is a huge reason why people aren't doing it. They don't want to take the time to do it. And before that, they might not even want to take the time to understand what it is because they are already dealing with so much going on in their lives as researchers. But that wraps up our purpose of open science topic. This was designed to give us kind of a breadth of space to explore open science from a conceptual perspective.